There's nothing quite like the moment when someone who has spent years looking down on you finally shows their true colors. The mask slips, the politeness dies, and suddenly, all those subtle digs and backhanded compliments explode into something raw and ugly. My mother-in-law had been building to this moment for 3 years. 3 years of treating me like I wasn't good enough for her precious son. 3 years of making me feel small at every family gathering. 3 years of questioning my worth, my contributions, my very existence in their perfect little world. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the mysterious benefactor who had been quietly solving their financial problems for years was sitting right at their dinner table. The mortgage relief they credited to Daniel's company, that was me. The scholarship that sent Emma to Columbia, that was me. Every stroke of good fortune they'd attributed to their son's success was actually coming from the woman they treated like dead weight. Before we dive into the story, I have a quick favor to ask. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I love seeing how far our stories reach. And if this is your first time here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single twist in our revenge stories. We drop new videos every single day. Now, let's get back to the story. My name is Abigail, and this is the story of how I let my in-laws destroy themselves with their own cruelty, simply by giving them exactly what they asked for. I met Anthony 5 years ago at a tech conference in San Francisco. I was 28, presenting my AI automation software to a room full of investors. He was in the audience, brilliant and charming, working as a senior developer for a struggling startup. What caught my attention wasn't just his intelligence, it was how he listened. Really listened. When everyone else was trying to poke holes in my presentation, he asked thoughtful questions about scalability and user experience. We started dating 3 months later. By then, my company was already pulling in 8 figures annually, but I never talked about money. I drove a modest Honda, lived in a nice but not extravagant apartment, and dressed simply. Anthony fell in love with who I was, not what I had. And honestly, that meant everything to me. When he proposed after 2 years, I said yes without hesitation. But then I met his parents, Richard and Margaret Coleman, upper-middle-class family from Connecticut who desperately wanted to be seen as old money. The kind of people who judge you by your pedigree, your connections, and whether you went to the right schools, because they themselves felt insecure about not having those things naturally. The first time Anthony brought me home, Margaret looked me up and down like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. "So, Abigail," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, "what do your parents do?" "My father was a mechanic. My mother cleaned houses," I replied honestly. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard cleared his throat and changed the subject, but I caught the look that passed between them. I wasn't good enough. I would never be good enough. Over the next 3 years, they made their feelings crystal clear. At our engagement party, Margaret joked to her friends within earshot, "Well, at least Anthony will always be the breadwinner. She seems like the type who'll be happy just keeping house the worst part." They never even tried to get to know me. They saw a quiet woman from a working-class background and decided I was a gold digger. If they had bothered to ask, they would have learned that I graduated summa cum laude from MIT, that I held 3 patents in machine learning, that I'd been featured on the cover of Forbes' 30 Under 30 list. But they never asked. Instead, they made every family gathering an exercise in subtle humiliation. Margaret would gush about Anthony's work, then turn to me with that patronizing smile and ask, "And how are you keeping busy, dear?" As if I spent my days arranging flowers and watching soap operas. During our wedding planning, things escalated. They insisted on inviting their entire social circle, 300 people, but forgot to ask if I had family I wanted to include. When I mentioned wanting to invite my mentor from MIT, Margaret actually said, "Oh, I don't think your college friends would fit in with our crowd." The wedding itself was a masterclass in passive aggression. During the reception, Richard gave a toast that spent 5 minutes praising Anthony's potential and 30 seconds acknowledging that he'd found someone who makes him happy. Margaret made sure to seat my family at the back tables, far from their important friends. But the real breaking point came 6 months after our wedding. Anthony had been working insane hours at his startup, and it was failing. He was stressed, exhausted, and starting to doubt himself. One evening, he came home defeated. I think I need to start looking for other options, he said, slumping onto our couch. The company's hemorrhaging money. We'll be lucky to last another month. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. What if you didn't have to look anywhere else? I asked quietly. He looked confused. What do you mean? I took a deep breath. What if I told you I could offer you a position? As COO of a company that's profitable, growing, and could use someone with your exact skills. Abigail, that's sweet, but I can't ask you to. You're not asking, I'm offering. And the company is mine. The conversation that followed lasted until 3 in the morning. I showed him everything, the incorporation papers, the financial statements, the client contracts. My little AI automation company that I'd been running, as a hobby, was actually a $60 million operation with offices in 4 cities. Anthony was stunned. Not angry, not hurt, just amazed. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. Because I wanted you to love me for me, not for what I could provide. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, that same thoughtful smile that had caught my attention at the conference. I do love you for you. The fact that you're also a secret business mogul is just incredibly attractive. He joined my company the next week, and he was brilliant at it. Within 6 months, he'd streamlined our operations so efficiently that our profit margins increased by 30%. He wasn't riding my coattails, he was making me better. But his parents, they saw his new job as another sign of my inadequacy. It's such a shame, Margaret confided to her sister, loudly enough for me to overhear at a family barbecue. He had such potential, and now he's working for some little startup. I blame her influence. She's made him settle for mediocrity. They had no idea that the little startup was paying Anthony 3 times what his previous job had offered, plus equity that would make him a millionaire in his own right within 2 years. Around this time, I decided to make some quiet investments in the family's well-being. Nothing flashy. Nothing that would reveal my true financial situation. When Richard mentioned struggling with the mortgage on their lakefront home, a property they'd stretched to afford to maintain their social image, I anonymously purchased the property through a shell company and forgave their debt. When their car started having issues, I arranged for Anthony to win a car lease through his new company's benefits package, a lease I personally funded. Margaret had always dreamed of joining the exclusive Riverside Country Club, but they couldn't afford the membership fees. So I made a generous donation to the club's scholarship fund, specifically earmarked for worthy local families. They never knew the donation came from me. Anthony's youngest sister Emma was brilliant, but struggling to afford the expensive college. Her parents were too proud to take out loans, and Emma was facing the prospect of community college when she'd been accepted to Columbia. I created an anonymous scholarship fund through my company's charitable foundation. Emma got her Columbia education fully funded. For 3 years, I quietly supported this family that treated me like garbage. Not because I wanted their gratitude, but because I loved Anthony and they were part of him. But my patience wasn't infinite. The breaking point came at Emma's college graduation party. It should have been a celebration. Instead, it became a referendum on my worth as a human being. Emma's graduation party was held at Richard and Margaret's house, the house I secretly owned. The entire extended family was there, plus family, friends, and neighbors. It was one of those perfect spring afternoons that made their lakefront property look like something from a magazine. I'd brought Emma a graduation gift, a professional-grade laptop for her new job at a tech startup in Seattle. Nothing too extravagant, but high quality. She loved it, giving me a genuine hug and thanking me profusely. That's when Margaret made her first cutting remark of the day. "How generous," she said, loud enough for nearby relatives to hear. "Though I suppose when you don't have children of your own to save for, it's easier to be frivolous with money." The comment stung. Anthony and I had been trying to have children. We'd been through fertility testing, and the doctors couldn't find anything wrong, but it just wasn't happening yet. Margaret knew this was a sensitive topic for me. I forced a smile and walked away, but the damage was done. I could feel the eyes of Anthony's aunts and uncles on me, measuring, judging. Things got worse during the lunch. Margaret had organized a complicated seating arrangement that somehow placed me at the kids' table with Emma's teenage cousins, while Anthony was seated with the adults. When I quietly mentioned this to Anthony, he started to get up to switch seats. Don't make a scene, Margaret hissed, grabbing his arm. Abigail will be fine with the children. She needs the practice. Another fertility jab. This time, Anthony's jaw tightened. Mom, that's enough. Oh, don't be so sensitive, I'm just teasing. But she wasn't done. During Richard's toast to Emma, he made a point of thanking everyone who had contributed to Emma's success. He mentioned teachers, coaches, family members who had provided encouragement. He even thanked the mailman who had delivered her acceptance letter. But when his eyes passed over me, he simply moved on. The irony was staggering. I was literally the person who had made Emma's Columbia education possible, and I was being treated like furniture. After lunch, I was helping clear dishes when Margaret's sister Linda cornered me in the kitchen. You know, Linda said, Margaret's worried about Anthony. Worried how? Well, he's been so different since he married you. More distant from the family. And this new job of his, it's not really living up to his potential, is it? I kept washing dishes, my hands steady despite the anger building in my chest. He seems happy with his work, I said carefully. But is he challenged? Is he growing? Margaret thinks he's gotten comfortable, and that's not good for a man like Anthony. He needs someone who pushes him to be better, not someone who lets him settle. The implication was clear. I was holding Anthony back. That evening, as the party wound down, I was collecting our things when I overheard a conversation between Margaret and her friend Patricia on the back porch. I just don't understand what he sees in her, Margaret was saying. She's so plain, and she has no conversation. Did you notice she barely said a word all afternoon? Some men like the quiet type, Patricia replied diplomatically. But Anthony's not some man, he's exceptional. He deserves someone who matches his caliber, someone with ambition, with connections, with, I don't know, some spark. Maybe she has qualities you don't see. Margaret actually laughed. Trust me, Patricia, I've been watching for 3 years. There's nothing there. She's perfectly nice, I suppose, but she brings nothing to the table. Nothing at all. I stood in the hallway, holding our coats, listening to my mother-in-law explain to her friend why I was fundamentally inadequate as a human being. When Anthony found me a few minutes later, I was still standing there, perfectly still. Ready to go? He asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The drive home was quiet. Anthony kept glancing at me, sensing something was wrong, but I wasn't ready to talk about it. How do you tell your husband that his mother just spent 10 minutes cataloging all the ways you're insufficient? That night, Anthony's sister Emma called to thank me again for the laptop. We chatted for a while about her new job, her move to Seattle, her excitement about starting her career. Then, just before we hung up, she said something that broke my heart. Abigail, I hope you know how much I appreciate everything you've done for me. I know Mom and Dad can be difficult sometimes, but you're good for Anthony. Don't let them make you think otherwise. Even Emma, the baby of the family, could see what was happening. The next few weeks were tense. Anthony noticed my growing distance from his family events, and he started pushing back on his parents' treatment of me. This only made things worse. Every time he defended me, they saw it as proof that I was driving a wedge between them. The situation reached a crescendo when Margaret called Anthony directly to express her concerns. I'm worried about you, she told him during a phone call I could hear from the next room. You've changed so much since you got married. You used to be so ambitious, so driven. Now you seem content to just coast. I'm not coasting, Mom. I'm happier than I've ever been. But are you challenged? Are you growing? This little company you're working for now, it's not exactly Microsoft, is it? If only she knew. My work is fulfilling, Anthony said carefully. Anthony, honey, I love you, and I want what's best for you. But sometimes love means making hard choices. Sometimes it means admitting when we've settled for less than we deserve. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Margaret systematically dismantling our marriage, our life choices, and my character. She never said directly that Anthony should leave me, but the message was unmistakable. When Anthony hung up, his face was pale. I'm sorry, he said. She's getting worse. Maybe we should take a break from family dinners for a while, I suggested. But Margaret wasn't about to let us retreat gracefully. 2 days later, she called to invite us to Sunday dinner. It's been too long since we've all been together, she said sweetly. And I have something special planned. Anthony wanted to decline, but I surprised him. Let's go, I said. Are you sure? I was tired of running, tired of being the family punching bag, tired of pretending their cruelty didn't affect me. I'm sure. If Margaret wanted to push, I was ready to push back. Sunday dinner at the Coleman house was supposed to be a family tradition. Margaret always went all out, her finest china, fresh flowers, perfectly prepared meals that took her all day to make. It was her stage, and she was the star. That particular Sunday felt different from the moment we walked in. Margaret was too bright, too cheerful, like an actress who'd had too much caffeine before a performance. Richard was more subdued than usual, nursing a whiskey and avoiding eye contact. "Abigail, darling," Margaret exclaimed, air-kissing my cheeks with theatrical warmth. "You look fine." Even her compliments were insults. Anthony and I were the only guests. Usually these dinners included Emma or various aunts and uncles, but tonight it was just the four of us. Intimate, intentional. The first course passed without incident. Margaret dominated the conversation, talking about neighbors, local gossip, anything but the elephant in the room. But I could feel the tension building. She kept shooting meaningful looks at Richard, like they'd rehearsed something. During the main course, she finally made her move. "Anthony," she said, setting down her fork with deliberate precision, "your father and I have been talking." Here it comes, I thought. "We're concerned about you, about your future." Anthony looked up from his plate, instantly wary. "Concerned how?" "Well, you're 32 now. At your age, your father had already been promoted twice, bought this house, started building real wealth. But you," she gestured vaguely, "you seem to be drifting." "I'm not drifting, Mom. I have a good job that I enjoy." "A good job?" Richard finally spoke up. "Anthony, you're working for some no-name company that probably won't exist in 5 years. Where's your ambition? Where's the drive we raised you with?" I kept eating, saying nothing, but every muscle in my body was tense. "I'm happy," Anthony said firmly. "Isn't that worth something?" Margaret actually scoffed. "Happy. Anthony, happiness is a luxury you can afford once you've built something meaningful, once you've achieved something worthy of your potential." "What exactly are you suggesting?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Margaret and Richard exchanged another look. "We think," Margaret said carefully, "that you've gotten comfortable, complacent, and we think we know why." She turned to look at me directly for the first time all evening. "Abigail, honey, you seem like a perfectly nice person. But you have to understand, Anthony comes from a family of achievers. His grandfather built a shipping empire. His father is a successful attorney. Anthony himself graduated top of his class from Harvard." I nodded politely, as if this was new information. "The thing is," she continued, "we've always believed that you become like the people you surround yourself with. If you're around ambitious people, you become ambitious. If you're around people who are content with less, well." The implication hung in the air like smoke. "Mom," Anthony's voice carried a warning, but Margaret was just getting started. The wine had loosened her tongue, and 3 years of polite restraint came pouring out. "I've tried to like you, Abigail, I really have. But I have to be honest, I don't see what you bring to this marriage. You don't challenge Anthony, you don't inspire him, you don't even seem to have your own ambitions." "That's enough," Anthony said, his voice rising. "No, it's not enough." Margaret's mask finally slipped completely. "I've watched my brilliant son settle for mediocrity, and I won't pretend it's fine anymore. She's holding you back, Anthony. Can't you see that?" Richard nodded slowly. "Your mother's right, son. You used to have big dreams. Now you're working for some tiny tech company, living in that modest apartment, driving that practical car. Where's the Anthony who wanted to change the world?" I found my voice, speaking for the first time since we'd sat down. "Maybe he's changing the world in ways you don't recognize." Margaret whipped around to face me. "Oh, really? And how exactly is filing reports for some startup changing the world?" Her tone was so dismissive, so dripping with contempt, that something inside me snapped. But I kept my voice level. "You'd be surprised what can look small from the outside." "Small?" Margaret's voice was getting louder now. "Abigail, honey, I think you're confused about what constitutes success. Anthony could be running his own company by now. He could be making real money, building real wealth, if he hadn't gotten distracted by—" She gestured at me like I was a piece of furniture she couldn't quite identify. "By what, Margaret?" Anthony's voice was dangerously quiet. "By settling," the words exploded out of her. "By choosing comfort over growth, by marrying someone who has no drive, no ambition, no—" "Stop." Anthony stood up from the table. But Margaret was beyond stopping. 3 years of resentment came pouring out in a torrent of cruelty. She's dead weight, Anthony. Can't you see that? She's perfectly content to let you support her while she does. What exactly? What does she do all day? What does she contribute to this family, to your future, to anything? She was standing now too, her face flushed with wine and anger. She's a parasite, a leech. She married you for security and now she's dragging you down to her level. The room went dead silent. Even Richard looked shocked at his wife's venom. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, and smiled. I understand, I said softly. I'll leave now. I stood up gracefully, picked up my purse, and headed for the door. Abigail, wait, Anthony started after me. No, Margaret called out. Let her go. Maybe this is exactly what needed to happen. I paused at the doorway and turned back. You're right, Margaret. This is exactly what needed to happen. The car ride home was silent except for Anthony's heavy breathing. He was furious, angrier than I'd ever seen him. His knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel. I can't believe she said those things to you, he finally exploded as we pulled into our driveway. The dead weight comment. The parasite thing, that wasn't just cruel, it was insane. I remained calm, which seemed to frustrate him more. She's your mother, Anthony. She loves you. She just doesn't understand our relationship. Love, he slammed the car door. That wasn't love, that was character assassination. Inside our apartment, Anthony immediately reached for his phone. I'm calling her back. She needs to apologize. She needs to, don't. Something in my voice stopped him. Abigail, I can't let this stand. What she said was unforgivable. I sat down on our couch and looked at my husband, this brilliant, loyal, wonderful man who'd been defending me against his family's cruelty for 3 years. Anthony, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting. He sat down across from me, still radiating anger. Your parents think I'm dead weight. They think I contribute nothing to this family, to your life, to anything. And you know what? I've let them think that. Anthony opened his mouth to protest, but I held up a hand. For 3 years, I've listened to them dismiss me, diminish me, and treat me like I'm some kind of gold-digging charity case you picked up somewhere. And I've never corrected them. But after tonight, I think it's time they learned exactly what I contribute. I pulled out my laptop and opened a folder I'd prepared weeks ago, hoping I'd never need to use it. The house we just had dinner in. The one where your mother just called me a parasite. I bought it for them 3 years ago when your father was facing foreclosure. Anthony's expression shifted from anger to confusion. The car your father drives, leased through the company, the country club membership your mother is so proud of, funded by my charitable foundation, your sister's Columbia education, paid for by an anonymous scholarship that I created and funded. I turned the laptop screen toward him, showing bank statements, property deeds, financial records. Anthony stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open. I closed the laptop and looked at him directly. Your parents think you married down. The truth is, you married someone who's been quietly supporting their entire lifestyle for 3 years while they treated her like garbage. Anthony was silent for a long time, processing. Why didn't you tell them? He finally asked. Because I wanted to see if they could love me for who I am, not what I have, and I wanted to protect you from having to choose between your family and your wife. But they've been so cruel. Yes, they have. And now they're going to learn what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you. The next morning, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my attorney, instructing him to begin the process of transferring the lakefront property back to my name exclusively, with a notice to quit giving the current occupants 30 days to vacate. The second was to my corporate fleet manager, arranging for the immediate return of a certain leased vehicle. The third was to the Riverside Country Club, informing them that the anonymous donor who had been funding certain memberships would be discontinuing that support effective immediately. Then I called my assistant, Charlotte, who had been my friend since college and knew everything about my situation with Anthony's family. It's time, I told her. Finally, she said. I was wondering how long you were going to let them walk all over you. What do you need me to do? Prepare the documentation. Property transfers, lease terminations, scholarship discontinuations. Make it all official. With pleasure. Should I make it extra formal and intimidating? Just professional. Let the facts speak for themselves. Over the next 2 weeks, the Coleman family received a series of official letters. The property notice, the vehicle return notice, the club membership termination. Each letter was polite, professional, and devastating, Anthony told me about the phone calls that followed. First, his father called in a panic. "Anthony, we've received some kind of legal notice about the house. It says we have to vacate in 30 days. There must be some mistake. We've lived here for 15 years. "It's not a mistake, Dad. But how is this possible? We own this house. Actually, you don't. You haven't owned it for 3 years. There was a long silence. What are you talking about? Abigail bought it when you were facing foreclosure. She's been letting you live in her house rent-free while you called her a parasite. The silence stretched even longer. Then Margaret grabbed the phone. "This is ridiculous. Abigail doesn't have that kind of money. She can't just kick us out of our own home. Mom, it's not your home. Abigail has been supporting this family in ways you can't even imagine, and you've repaid her kindness with 3 years of cruelty." "I don't believe it. You're making this up to punish us for telling the truth about her." "The truth?" Anthony's voice was ice cold. "You want to know the truth? The truth is that Abigail is worth more than our entire extended family combined. The truth is that she's been anonymously paying for Emma's education, your club membership, and Dad's car. The truth is that she runs a $60 million company and I work for her." Another silence. Then, in a much smaller voice, She runs a company. She doesn't just run it, Mom. She built it from nothing. She's brilliant, successful, and generous to a fault, and you called her dead weight." Margaret tried to backtrack. "Anthony, we didn't know. If you had realized she was rich, you would have treated her better. That's your defense." The conversations continued for days. Denial, anger, bargaining, more anger. Richard actually drove to my office building, demanding to speak with whoever's in charge. The receptionist politely informed him that the CEO was in meetings all day. "Well, can you at least tell me her name?" he demanded. "Certainly, sir. Abigail Coleman." I heard he sat in his car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, staring at the building with my name on it. Margaret left voicemails, dozens of them. First angry, then pleading, then angry again. "Abigail, this is ridiculous. We're family. Families fight sometimes, but they don't make each other homeless. Call me back." "Abigail, I may have spoken harshly, but you have to understand, we were just looking out for Anthony's best interests. Surely you can see that." "Abigail, your silence is childish. If you have something to say, say it. Don't hide behind lawyers and eviction notices." I never called back. Emma, bless her heart, figured it out on her own. She called me directly. "Abigail, I just heard about the house situation. Mom's been calling me crying, saying you're trying to destroy the family. But that's not what's happening, is it? What do you think is happening, Emma? I think Mom and Dad have been horrible to you for years, and you finally got tired of it. And I think there's a lot about you that they never bothered to learn." Smart girl. "Emma, I want you to know that your scholarship is safe. What's happening between me and your parents has nothing to do with you. Did you really pay for my college? Does it matter who paid for it? You earned it with your grades and your hard work." She was quiet for a moment. "It matters to me, because if it was you, then I owe you more than I can ever repay." "You don't owe me anything," I replied. The 30 days passed quickly. Richard and Margaret found a rental apartment in a modest neighborhood 40 minutes away from their former lakefront paradise. They had to downsize significantly. No room for Margaret's elaborate dinner parties or Richard's home office. Anthony went to help them move. He came home exhausted and sad. "They kept asking if there was anything they could do to fix this," he told me. Dad actually cried. I've never seen him cry. "What did you tell them?" I told them the truth, that they could start by apologizing to you, really apologizing. Not because they want their house back, but because they were wrong about who you are and how they treated you. And Mom said she was sorry I was choosing money over family. Some people never learn. 3 months later, I received a handwritten letter from Margaret. Not an email, not a text, but an actual letter on stationery. "Dear Abigail," it began, "I have spent the last 3 months thinking about our last dinner together, and I owe you an apology. Not because of the house, or the car, or any of the other things we've lost, but because I was wrong about you as a person. I let my fears for Anthony's future blind me to your actual character and contributions. I said terrible things that I can never take back, and I am truly sorry." The letter went on for 2 pages. It was thoughtful, detailed, and seemed genuine. She acknowledged specific moments when she'd been cruel, admitted that she'd never tried to get to know the real me, and asked if there was any possibility of rebuilding our relationship. I showed it to Anthony. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think it's a start." We never moved back into a big family dinner routine, but gradually, over the course of a year, relationships began to heal. Margaret and Richard had to confront their own prejudices and assumptions. They had to accept that their son had married someone who was not only their equal, but, in many ways, their superior in terms of achievement and success. More importantly, they had to learn to value qualities beyond wealth and status. It took time, but they eventually came to appreciate my loyalty, my discretion, and my genuine care for their son. Emma and I grew closer. She became something of a bridge between me and her parents, helping them understand perspectives they'd never considered. As for the house, I eventually sold it to a lovely young family with small children who would actually appreciate the lake access and the big backyard. Richard and Margaret had been using it more as a status symbol than a home anyway. Anthony and I bought our own place, a beautiful but not ostentatious house where we could build our own traditions without the weight of other people's expectations. And 6 months after that dinner where I was called dead weight, I got pregnant. Margaret cried when we told her, and this time they were tears of joy, not manipulation. "I'm going to be the best grandmother," she promised. "I'm going to make up for everything." She's trying. They both are. It's not perfect, and it probably never will be. But it's honest now, which is something it never was before. The baby, a little girl we named Grace, is now 6 months old. She's the light of everyone's life, including her formerly judgmental grandparents, who now drive 40 minutes every Sunday to have dinner with us. Margaret still makes elaborate meals, but now she asks what I'd like to contribute instead of assuming I have nothing to offer. Richard still tells long stories about his cases, but now he also asks about my business and seems genuinely interested in the answers. They're different people now, not perfect but different, and I think I'm different too. I learned that sometimes quiet strength looks like weakness to people who only understand loud power, but that doesn't make it any less strong. I learned that generosity without recognition is still generosity, even when the people you're helping treat you poorly in return. And I learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop doing what you've always done and let people experience the consequences of their choices. Not out of cruelty, but out of self-respect. Sometimes the strongest revenge is simply refusing to be taken for granted anymore. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button. And don't forget to share this video and subscribe if you haven't already. We've got more incredible revenge stories coming your way.